My name is Aurora Whitfield. I'm 32 years old, from Columbus, Ohio, and for most of my adult life, my family treated my younger sister like a fragile dream and treated me like the emergency generator they could switch on whenever life got expensive. My mother Diane was 58. My father Leonard was 61. My sister Tessa was 27 and permanently convinced she was one good opportunity away from becoming wildly successful. Tessa had what my aunt once called motivational amnesia. Every failed plan disappeared from her memory the second she discovered a new one. There was the candle business, the luxury baking phase, the online boutique that lasted 3 weeks, the photography rebrand, even though she barely knew how to use the camera she financed. Every collapse had an explanation. Bad timing, fake friends, unsupportive people, a toxic business partner, the algorithm, the economy. Never Tessa. Never her spending. Never the fact that she lived like consequences were fictional. I was the opposite.
Quiet. Organized. Predictable.
I worked as an accounting analyst for a regional healthcare network, earning about $84,000 a year. I liked routines. I budgeted everything. I tracked subscriptions in spreadsheets. I paid bills early because late fees irritated me on a spiritual level. To most people, that sounded responsible. To my family, it meant available. After my apartment lease ended the previous year, I moved back into my parents' house temporarily to save for a down payment on a condo. That had been the agreement. 12 months. Maybe 14 if the housing market stayed awful. I paid $850 every month toward household expenses. I bought my own groceries half the time, covered the internet bill, and handled almost every inconvenient problem nobody else wanted to deal with. If the sink backed up, I fixed it. If Dad forgot passwords, I recovered accounts. If Mom struggled uploading insurance documents, she called me. At first, I didn't mind. Then slowly, without anybody saying it out loud, my presence transformed into something else. I stopped being Aurora. I became backup funding. The final disaster started with a van. Not a normal van. A brand new customized Mercedes Sprinter van for Tessa's luxury mobile pet grooming company that technically did not exist yet. White exterior, pink logo mock-ups, premium interior modifications, grooming station equipment, financing package, upgraded wheels. The total cost was just over $63,000. Tessa had roughly $2,000 saved and a credit score that probably made lenders physically uncomfortable. So naturally, the family solution became me. Mom brought it up during Sunday dinner, with the careful voice people use when pretending something outrageous is completely reasonable. She said, "Tessa just needs a co-signer to help get started. She finally has a real plan this time." I remember looking up slowly from my plate. Dad added, "Banks don't look at potential anymore. They only care about numbers." I said, "Banks care about numbers because numbers are honest." Tessa rolled her eyes dramatically. "It's not like I'm asking you for money," she said. "Just your name." That phrase irritated me instantly. Just your name. As if your name wasn't the entire risk. I told her no immediately. Not maybe. Not let me think about it. No. Dad set his fork down carefully. That was always a warning sign with him. "Family helps family," he said. I answered, "Family also shouldn't pressure one daughter into gambling her financial future because the other daughter wants a luxury business vehicle she can't afford." The temperature at the table changed instantly. Mom's expression tightened first. Then came the guilt. "After everything we've done for you," she said, "letting you stay here, supporting you." I reminded her I paid to live there every single month.
Consistently.
Unlike Tessa, who treated due dates like vague suggestions from the universe, Tessa got louder after that. She accused me of thinking I was superior because I had a corporate job and spreadsheets. I told her I believed contracts mattered. Apparently, that made me the villain. Dinner ended ugly. Not because I screamed. I've never been the screamer in my family. I just quietly rinsed my plate and went downstairs to the converted den I'd been using as a bedroom. One tiny window. Door that stuck during winter. Cheap, but temporary. Or at least I thought it was temporary by choice. The next afternoon, Mom came downstairs holding dealership paperwork. Actual printed financing estimates. Monthly payments. Insurance projections. Terms. She placed the papers on my desk like she was assigning homework. "If you sign," she said, "Tessa can pick it up Friday." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because the entitlement felt surreal. I reminded her I had already said no. Then Dad stepped into the room behind her, clearly listening the entire time. "You're being difficult for no reason," he snapped. "It's a signature, Aurora, not a kidney. It becomes my problem the second she misses a payment." Right on cue, Tessa appeared downstairs, like she'd been waiting for her entrance. "I'm standing right here like I'm some criminal," she snapped. I looked directly at her. "You have maxed out credit cards, a repossession from last year, and unpaid collections. I don't need imagination here." That was the moment Dad lost his temper. "If you won't co-sign for your sister," he said, "pack your things." Silence swallowed the room. Mom folded her arms. Tessa stood there, breathing hard. But underneath her anger, I saw confidence. She thought I would cave. They all did. Dad repeated himself slower this time. "If you can't support this family, you don't need to live here." And suddenly, something inside me went completely still. No panic. No heartbreak. Just clarity. I said, "Okay." Mom blinked. "Don't be dramatic." "I'm not." Then I reached under my bed for the plastic storage container holding my important documents.
Birth certificate. Passport.
Tax returns. Social Security card. Car title. Bank records. The kind of things you instinctively grab once a conversation stops feeling emotional and starts feeling legal. Dad looked genuinely confused. "Where exactly are you going to go?" "Somewhere people understand what no means." Tessa laughed, but it sounded nervous now. I texted Caleb Mercer, one of my oldest friends. He lived 20 minutes away in Dublin and had mentioned months earlier that his guest room was empty. I asked if the offer still stood. He replied almost immediately, "Of course, come over." So I packed. Not dramatically. No crying. No yelling. I packed clothes, toiletries, electronics, work files, my small fireproof safe, and the air fryer I bought after Mom kept accidentally using groceries I paid for myself. 3 trips to my car. On the second trip, Mom followed me into the driveway. "So that's it?" she asked. "You're choosing pride over family?" I looked at her and felt something inside me crack quietly. "No," I said. "I'm choosing not to chain myself financially to Tessa's bad decisions. You'll regret talking to us like this. The only thing I regret is staying long enough for you to think this was a reasonable thing to ask me." I left at 5:42 p.m. I remember because I stared at the dashboard clock the entire way out of the neighborhood, feeling strangely numb. By 6:30, I was in Caleb's guest room, setting my documents neatly onto a shelf while he gave me space without asking too many questions. That kindness almost made me cry harder than the fight itself. At 8:14 p.m., Mom called. Then Dad. Then Tessa. Then all 3 started a group text. "Mom, you made your point. Come home." "Stop acting like the victim." "Dad, we need to discuss this like adults." I responded once. "Adults don't threaten housing to force financial signatures. Do not contact me tonight." Then I muted the conversation. The next morning, I froze my credit. Changed passwords. Removed my parents as emergency contacts from banking accounts. Not because I believed they would definitely misuse my information, but because a part of me no longer trusted what desperation might convince them was acceptable. That realization hurt more than I expected. During lunch break, I quietly met with a mortgage broker because I had already been looking at condos privately before the explosion happened. Ironically, getting thrown out accelerated everything. I also called my Aunt Evelyn, Mom's older sister, because I knew family stories mutated fast. I wanted at least one person to hear the truth before Tessa rewrote me into some cruel monster. I explained everything. The van. The cosign pressure. Dad's ultimatum. Me leaving. Evelyn listened quietly. Then she sighed. "Let me guess," she said. "Tessa has another business plan and absolutely no paperwork." I almost laughed, despite myself. Then Aunt Evelyn said something that stayed with me for months afterward. "You are not selfish for refusing to drown just because everybody else is pretending the water feels normal." That was the first moment since leaving the house that I felt something close to peace. But the peace didn't last long. Because 3 days later, the family campaign against me officially began. 3 days after I left home, I became the villain in a story I barely recognized. That was the impressive thing about my family. They could turn emotional manipulation into community theater almost instantly. The first message came from my cousin Brianna in Phoenix. "Hey," she texted, "I think maybe you're taking this too far. Your parents are really hurt." Not confused. Not concerned. Hurt. That word told me immediately which version of events she had been given. An hour later, my grandmother left me a voicemail saying Dad sounded heartbroken, and Tessa claimed I'd insulted her, abandoned the family, and stormed out over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Like they had accidentally asked me to pass the salt, instead of legally tying myself to $63,000 of debt. Then came an email from one of Dad's church friends titled, "Family Matters Most." I didn't even open it. There's a certain kind of person who thinks boundaries are immoral if they inconvenience older relatives. I was too exhausted to debate my credit score with men who sold protein powder out of pickup trucks. But what really unsettled me wasn't the gossip. It was how fast my parents rewrote reality. I realized they genuinely needed me to become unreasonable in the story, because otherwise they would have to confront what they'd actually done. So I responded selectively. To Brianna, I sent one screenshot. Dad's message from the night I left. "If you can't support this family, don't bother coming back." Nothing else. She read it and stopped replying immediately. To my grandmother, I called personally, because she deserved more than screenshots and half-truths. I explained the van, the cosign demand, the pressure, the ultimatum. She listened quietly, then sighed, the way older women do when disappointment feels familiar. "That girl always costs people more than they expect," she muttered about Tessa. Then she added softly, "Your mother should have known better." That mattered more to me than she probably realized. Meanwhile, Mom entered what I privately called her wounded saint phase. Long voicemails. Heavy sighs. Carefully emotional wording, designed to make me feel cruel without ever directly acknowledging what happened. One voicemail lasted almost 6 minutes. She said I embarrassed the family. That Tessa was devastated. That Dad only spoke in anger. That nobody thought I would actually leave. That sentence stayed with me. Nobody thought I would actually leave. Meaning the threat was never supposed to cost them anything. It was only supposed to control me. I didn't call her back. I texted instead. "If you didn't mean it, you shouldn't have said it." Her response came almost instantly. "You're making this bigger than it was." That sentence irritated me so badly, I had to physically put my phone down. Because people only say something is not a big deal when it's hurting someone else instead of them. Tessa escalated faster. She called me from 4 different numbers in one afternoon because I kept blocking them. On the 5th attempt, I finally answered. Not because I missed her. Because I wanted the harassment to stop. At first, she sounded soft, almost fragile. "I'm sorry things got crazy," she said quietly. "Dad overreacted." Interesting. Not "we overreacted." Dad. Already redistributing blame. Then she slipped into sales mode. She said she only needed help temporarily, 6 months maximum, until the business got moving properly. She even offered me 10% ownership. 10% of a business that didn't exist. I asked one question. "Do you have a business license?" Silence. I asked whether she had commercial insurance, tax projections, registered LLC paperwork, or confirmed grooming contracts. Her voice sharpened immediately. "This is why nobody tells you anything," she snapped. "You make everything feel like an interrogation." "That's because you're asking me to sign financial documents, Tessa." Then she made the mistake that ended the conversation permanently. Come on, Aurora. Even if you got stuck with 1 or 2 payments, it's not like it would ruin your life. The casualness of that sentence stunned me. Like my future was a manageable sacrifice. Like my financial stability existed specifically to cushion her mistakes. I hung up immediately afterward. That Friday, Aunt Evelyn called with information that explained everything. Apparently, my parents had already bragged publicly that Tessa's luxury grooming business was happening. At a neighborhood cookout. To church friends. To relatives. Tessa had shown people mock-up logos and Pinterest boards while Dad talked proudly about supporting entrepreneurship. They promised success before they secured financing, which meant my refusal didn't just inconvenience them financially, it embarrassed them socially. Suddenly, the pressure made perfect sense. This was never really about believing in Tessa. It was about pride.
Image. Optics.
My parents were willing to gamble my financial future because they couldn't tolerate looking foolish in front of people they barely even liked. That realization changed something inside me permanently. Then I learned Mom had been telling relatives I lived at home, rent-free. That part actually made me angry. Not emotional. Angry. Because it rewrote years of quiet contribution into dependency. So I gathered receipts. 11 months of Zelle transfers. Utility payments. Internet bills. Records showing I split the cost of replacing their water heater the previous winter. I sent screenshots into the family group chat with one sentence underneath. Please stop telling people I lived there for free. Dad called less than 2 minutes later, furious. You're humiliating your mother. No, I replied calmly. She humiliated herself by lying. Then came the sentence that confirmed everything I already suspected. You've changed. I remember leaning back against Caleb's kitchen counter while listening to him breathe heavily through the phone. No, I said quietly. I just stopped being useful. Then I hung up. Caleb found the entire situation both horrifying and weirdly entertaining. Every evening he'd come home from work, listen to another update, and stare at me like I was narrating a reality show. So let me get this straight, he said one night while microwaving leftover pasta. Your sister wants a $60,000 luxury van for a business with no clients, and your dad's negotiation strategy was homelessness? Apparently. He shook his head slowly. Bold strategy. I laughed harder than I expected. Humor was the only thing keeping the situation from turning into bitterness. That weekend, I started apartment hunting seriously again. Originally, I planned to buy a condo. But after everything happened, I didn't want to make major financial decisions while emotionally angry. I toured a 1-bedroom apartment in Grandview Heights Monday evening. In-unit laundry. Quiet hallways. Secure parking. Windows that actually opened. Nothing extravagant. But when I walked through the empty living room, I felt something strange tightening in my chest.
Relief.
Pure, uncomplicated relief. No tension humming underneath conversations. No emotional debt attached to basic existence. No walking upstairs wondering whether somebody wanted money, favors, explanations, or rescue. The rent was higher than I wanted. $16.90 a month. But peace has a market price. I applied that night. Got approved the next afternoon. My lease started in 12 days. For the first time since leaving home, I felt like my life was moving forward instead of emotionally bleeding out. Then Mom called, sounding bizarrely cheerful. That immediately put me on edge. We got the van, she announced proudly. I closed my eyes slowly. How? Your father stepped up for his daughter. Which translated roughly to, Leonard Whitfield sacrificed his retirement savings and co-signed personally through some predatory lender willing to finance bad decisions at horrifying interest rates. Mom sounded triumphant, like she expected me to feel guilty for not participating. See, she said, we didn't need you after all. That's great, I answered calmly. Then you definitely don't need my number anymore either. She ignored that completely. Families like mine rarely hear boundaries the first time. Then her voice softened artificially. We may just need a little help temporarily while things stabilize. There it was. The real request never disappears. It just changes clothes. I told her no immediately. She started reciting everything they'd done for me again. I reminded her for the second time that I paid rent consistently while living there. She hung up on me. 3 days later, Dad texted, asking if I could continue covering the internet bill temporarily, because they hadn't budgeted for the increase after I left. I didn't respond. An hour later, Tessa sent me a photo posing beside the van at a gas station. Caption: built, not bought. Which was ironic because literally every inch of it was bought. Then things crossed a line I still struggle thinking about. A woman from my bank's fraud department called me at work. She asked whether I recently attempted opening a joint automotive-related financial account online. I said, absolutely not. The application had triggered alerts because some security questions were answered incorrectly. I felt cold instantly. I asked what information had been used. She couldn't provide everything, but she confirmed my full name, birth date, and previous address had all been entered. My parents' house. I knew immediately. Maybe Tessa tried it herself. Maybe Mom handed over information thinking it wasn't serious. Maybe Dad thought if he got halfway through an application, I'd feel pressured into cooperating later. I still don't know exactly who did what. What I do know is someone inside that house tried involving me financially after I explicitly refused. That changed everything. The situation stopped feeling like painful family dysfunction. It started feeling dangerous. I filed fraud alerts that same day. Placed extended monitoring on my credit. Completed identity theft documentation through the FTC portal. Filled a police report for documentation purposes without directly accusing anyone by name because I couldn't prove intent. Then I printed copies of everything and organized them into a folder labeled "Do Not Ignore Again." When I told Aunt Evelyn, she went completely silent. Then she whispered, "Aurora, they've lost their minds." Apparently, she immediately called my mother, because less than an hour later, I had 12 missed calls and one furious text message waiting for me. "How dare you make this a police matter?" I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "How dare someone use my information after I said no?" Mom's response came seconds later. "I never used anything. I don't know what Tessa may have clicked." Not denial. Just carefully outsourced responsibility. That was the moment I stopped hoping the situation would magically become reasonable again. I emailed all 3 of them formally that night. Diane Whitfield, Leonard Whitfield, Tessa Whitfield. I instructed them not to use my name, credit, personal details, or documents for any applications, financing arrangements, or purchases moving forward. I stated future attempts would be handled through formal channels. Then I blocked Tessa again. Around the same time, her business social media pages launched publicly. Every photo featured the van. Very few featured actual clients. Mostly selfies. Inspirational captions. Hashtags about entrepreneurship. Expensive branding wrapped around almost no real work. 2 weeks later, she was already posting vague complaints about fuel prices, fake supporters, and how difficult small business ownership was. I watched quietly from a distance. And somewhere deep down, I started sensing the fantasy was beginning to crack. About 3 weeks after I left my parents' house, Dad called me from a number I didn't recognize. I answered automatically because I thought it was work. The second I heard his voice, my shoulders tightened. But something sounded different. Not angry. Tired. The kind of tired that seeps underneath a person's pride and starts hollowing them out from the inside. "The payment's higher than Tessa said," he admitted quietly. I leaned back slowly in my desk chair at work and stared through the glass wall of the conference room I'd hidden inside to take the call. "I'm shocked," I said. He ignored the sarcasm. Apparently, the interest rate attached to the van loan was catastrophic. Insurance was worse. Fuel costs were draining money faster than Tessa expected. She had already missed one automatic insurance draft because she moved money out of the account for marketing expenses, which probably meant custom hoodies and logo stickers. Dad spoke carefully, like every word physically hurt him. "We're trying to juggle things until the business stabilizes." There it was again. That word. We. Not Tessa. The whole family had become financially attached to one woman's fantasy. Then came the real ask. He wanted to know if I could loan them $2,500 temporarily to avoid falling behind while Tessa got organized. I didn't even pause. No. The silence afterward felt heavy. Then Dad exhaled sharply through his nose. You really would watch your own family sink. The guilt in his voice almost worked. Almost. Because some small wounded part of me still wanted him to sound like my father instead of a collections department employee. I lowered my voice. No, Dad. I'm refusing to jump into the water after people who tried pushing me in first. He went quiet. Then he said something that bothered me for hours afterward. Your mother cries every day. I swallowed hard before answering. She should probably think about why. After we hung up, I sat motionless in the conference room for several minutes, pretending to review spreadsheets while my chest ached in ways I didn't want to examine too closely. Because no matter how justified you are, it still hurts hearing your parents sound disappointed in you, especially when the disappointment comes from refusing to sacrifice yourself properly. Meanwhile, my own life kept improving in painfully ordinary ways. And honestly, that contrast made everything feel stranger. I signed the lease for the apartment in Grandview Heights, paid the first month and deposit, bought a used dining table off Facebook Marketplace for $140 from a couple getting divorced but still weirdly polite to each other, found a gray couch on clearance, set up my kitchen exactly how I liked it,
Quietly.
peacefully. Nobody borrowing my things. Nobody opening my mail accidentally on purpose. Nobody treating my paycheck like a shared emergency fund. The first night I slept there alone, I woke up at 3 a.m. because the silence felt unfamiliar. That's how normalized stress had become in my parents' house. My nervous system literally didn't know what to do without tension humming somewhere nearby. At work, things improved too. My manager, Melissa, pulled me aside after a meeting and told me I was being considered for a senior analyst promotion because of how well I handled a reconciliation project everyone else avoided. You're calm under pressure, she told me. I almost laughed. If she only knew, my entire childhood had basically been advanced pressure training. Meanwhile, Tessa's luxury pet grooming empire continued collapsing publicly in slow motion. At first, the business page was full of motivational posts. Dream big. Boss energy. Building something beautiful. Then gradually the tone changed. Complaints started slipping through. People don't support small businesses enough. Customers waste entrepreneurs' time. Fuel prices are criminal. People expect too much for premium service. I watched from a distance without responding. Every post felt less like marketing and more like emotional leakage. Then, Aunt Evelyn called one evening while I was assembling cheap bookshelves in my living room. You sitting down? She asked immediately. That depends how dramatic this is. Tessa missed another payment. I stopped tightening the screwdriver. Apparently, Dad had already borrowed against a retirement account once to help cover the van. Mom quietly took out a personal loan through her credit union to bridge the gap temporarily. The temporary gap was becoming a crater. They're fighting constantly, Aunt Evelyn said. Your father looks 10 years older. I sat on the floor, staring at half-built furniture, while a strange mix of emotions twisted inside me.
Sympathy.
Anger.
Relief. Grief.
Because, despite everything, hearing my family fall apart still hurt. That's the ugly truth nobody talks about with boundaries. Even when distance saves you, part of you still mourns the version of the family you kept hoping existed. Then Aunt Evelyn sighed heavily. Your mother still thinks you'll step in eventually. That sentence chilled me. Because she wasn't wrong. My family had spent years conditioning themselves to believe my stability existed for their emergencies. To them, my refusal wasn't a boundary. It was a temporary malfunction.
A phase.
Something I would eventually grow out of once guilt did its job properly. That realization hardened something inside me permanently. A few days later, I got another fraud notification. This one wasn't an application. It was an attempted password reset connected to one of my older financial accounts. Again, the recovery information referenced my parents' address. My stomach dropped instantly. I spent the next hour changing security questions, updating authentication settings, and locking down every account I owned like I was preparing for cyber warfare. And honestly, emotionally, that's what it felt like. Not because I thought my parents were criminal masterminds, because people become terrifyingly reckless once desperation and entitlement start blending together. I didn't tell many people about that second attempt. Only Caleb. He stared at me from across the kitchen island while eating cereal directly from the box. "You know what's insane?" he said finally. "The fact that you still sound guilty." "I don't sound guilty." "You do. Every time you talk about them, you sound like someone apologizing for surviving a house fire." I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it. Because part of me knew he was right. That weekend, I unpacked the final box in my apartment. Mostly childhood keepsakes. Old birthday cards. A photo of me and Tessa as little girls sitting on the hood of Dad's first car. I stared at that picture for a long time. We looked happy. Or maybe just young enough not to understand how differently we were being shaped. Tessa learned that charm brought rescue. I learned that competence brought responsibility. Same household. Different survival strategies. That night, Mom sent me a text after almost 2 weeks of silence. "We miss you." Just that. No apology. No accountability. No acknowledgement of the threats, lies, or fraud concerns. Just emotional bait hanging there like a fishing hook. I stared at the message without answering. Then another arrived. "Tessa is struggling mentally." There it was. The guilt pivot. I typed 3 separate responses before deleting all of them. Finally, I sent only one sentence. "She needs accountability more than rescue." Mom never responded. A week later, Tessa posted a blurry late-night Instagram story ranting about fake supporters and jealous people who secretly wanted her to fail. No names mentioned. None needed. I watched the video once. Then blocked her account entirely. Because I realized something uncomfortable while standing alone in my spotless apartment afterward. Every tiny connection back into that chaos reopened the wound. And I was finally beginning to understand that protecting your peace sometimes means accepting people will call you cold for refusing to let them hurt you repeatedly. Toward the end of the month, Dad called again. This time he sounded older somehow. Smaller. "The lender's threatening repossession," he admitted. I closed my eyes slowly. The fantasy was dying now. Not dramatically. Not with screaming. Just bills arriving faster than reality could keep up. "They said voluntary surrender might damage us less," he continued quietly. Us again. Always us. Never just Tessa. Then his voice cracked slightly. And hearing that almost hurt more than the manipulation ever did. Because for the first time in months, he sounded less like an angry father and more like a man realizing he'd wrecked his own life trying to protect someone from consequences. "Aurora," he said softly. "I just wanted your sister to succeed." I stared out my apartment window at the parking lot below, glowing under soft yellow lights. "I know," I whispered. And somehow, that made everything sadder. Tessa's business officially died 9 weeks after it started. 9. I know the exact number because Dad mentioned it later with the exhausted precision of someone describing a medical emergency. The social media pages disappeared first. Then the motivational quotes stopped. Then the "fully booked this week" posts quietly vanished. And finally, Tessa uploaded one long emotional statement about pivoting directions and learning valuable entrepreneurial lessons. The van, unfortunately, did not disappear with the dream. Reality is cruel like that. The payments stayed. The insurance stayed. The debt stayed. According to Aunt Evelyn, the atmosphere inside my parents' house had become unbearable. Dad was panicking over money. Mom blamed stress for everything. Tessa alternated between crying, rage, and insisting everyone was abandoning her during a difficult season. Nobody said the obvious thing out loud. The obvious thing being that the difficult season was entirely self-created. Then one Saturday around noon, Mom showed up at my apartment building unexpectedly. I had just come downstairs to grab a food delivery when I saw her standing near the entrance wearing oversized sunglasses and holding 2 grocery bags. For one disorienting second, she looked almost normal, like a mother visiting her daughter, like none of the previous months had happened. Then I noticed how tightly she was gripping the bags.
Nervous. Performative. Prepared.
I didn't invite her upstairs. Something inside me instinctively refused. So we stood in the lobby while people passed occasionally through the glass doors behind us. Mom started crying less than 30 seconds into the conversation. Not subtle tears. Immediate emotional flooding. "The family's falling apart," she whispered. I stayed quiet. "Your father's stressed all the time."
Silence.
Tessa's depressed. Still silence. Then, finally, "I miss you." That one almost got me. Because, despite everything, there was still a little girl somewhere inside me that wanted her mother to simply love her without conditions attached. But experience had taught me something painful. In my family, emotional softness usually arrived right before a request. And there it was. Mom adjusted her grip on the grocery bags and lowered her voice carefully. "If you could just help with the van payments for a few months, maybe 6 at most, it would give Tessa time to recover." I actually laughed. Not intentionally. My body simply reacted before my brain could stop it. Because hearing that request inside my apartment building after everything that happened felt so absurd it crossed into surreal territory. Mom's face tightened immediately. "You think this is funny?" "No," I said, still staring at her in disbelief. "I think it's unbelievable." "Aurora, you threw me out because I refused to take responsibility for that van. We were emotional. You tried using my information after I left. I told you I didn't know exactly what Tessa. You lied to relatives about me living there for free." Mom's tears slowed instantly. That change happened so fast, it almost startled me. 1 second, emotional devastation. The next second, calculation. And seeing it that clearly for the first time changed something permanent inside me. She lowered her voice. "You don't need to be cruel." "I'm not being cruel," I replied calmly. "I'm being consistent." Her expression hardened. "You've become cold." That word again. Cold. Interesting how boundaries always become cruelty once people stop benefiting from your compliance. I folded my arms slowly. No, I just stopped volunteering to be financially sacrificed every time Tessa wants something expensive. Mom looked around the lobby nervously, then stepped closer. "She's your sister. And I was your daughter when you told me to pack my things." That landed. I saw it physically hit her. For a second, she looked genuinely ashamed. Then, just as quickly, defensiveness returned. "You act like we abused you." I stared at her for several seconds because I genuinely didn't know how to explain emotional coercion to someone who considered it normal parenting. Finally, I said quietly, "You stopped seeing me as a person a long time ago. You started seeing me as access." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You think you're better than this family now?" "No," I said softly. "I think I finally realized I was never allowed to belong, unless I was useful." That silence afterward felt enormous. People walked through the lobby behind us while my mother stood there, gripping grocery bags like props in a play that had stopped working halfway through the performance. Then she tried one final angle. "If the van gets repossessed, your father's credit could be ruined." I looked directly at her. "He chose that. We all make sacrifices for family." "No," I said quietly. "Some families choose one child to sacrifice more than the others." Her face changed instantly. Not sadness. Anger. Real anger. And weirdly, that honesty felt easier to handle than the crying. "You know what your problem is?" she snapped softly. "You always needed to be right." I almost smiled. Because there it was. The real issue. Not the debt. Not the money. Not even the van. I refused to participate in the fantasy anymore. "I need you to leave," I said calmly. She stared at me. "I came here to make peace." "No, you came here to make another withdrawal." That one hurt her. I saw it immediately. Then I added something I never imagined saying to my own mother. If you show up at my home uninvited again, I'll consider it harassment. Her mouth opened slightly. The cameras in the lobby suddenly seemed very noticeable to her. People passed behind us. The performance no longer felt safe. Mom picked up the grocery bags again slowly. "I hope you can live with yourself," she whispered. The strange thing was, for the first time in months, I actually could. She walked out without another word. The second I got upstairs, I sat at my kitchen counter and documented the entire interaction in an email to myself. Date. Time.
Conversation details.
Specific financial request. Because by then, I had learned something painful. When emotional manipulation becomes normalized, documentation becomes self-defense. A week later, Dad called. Not for money. For the first time in months, not for money. His voice sounded hollow. "The van's gone," he said quietly.
Voluntary surrender.
Such a polite phrase for total collapse. Apparently, repossession became inevitable after multiple missed payments and threats from the lender. Their credit was damaged badly. Mom was furious. Tessa moved out temporarily after screaming matches became constant. Dad sounded like a man walking through the ashes of his own decisions. Then came something I never expected. "I should never have told you to pack your things." I froze completely, because I had replayed that sentence in my head hundreds of times. Imagined apologies. Imagined confrontations. Imagined indifference. But hearing him actually say it out loud felt strangely unreal. He kept talking. I let guilt cloud my judgment. I kept trying to save Tessa from consequences. His voice cracked softly. "And I turned you into collateral." That word hit hard.
Collateral.
Because that's exactly what I had become. Something valuable to leverage during emergencies. Dad admitted he knew I contributed far more financially to the household than they ever acknowledged publicly. He admitted they pressured me unfairly. He admitted threatening my housing was wrong. It wasn't a perfect apology. Pieces of defensiveness still floated underneath parts of it. But it was real enough that I recognized sincerity hiding beneath the pride. And honestly, that mattered. "I appreciate you saying that," I told him quietly. He exhaled shakily. Then, after a pause, he asked, "Maybe we could get lunch sometime. Just us." I looked around my apartment while soft evening light spilled across the floor. My apartment, my peace, my boundaries. Everything I nearly sacrificed trying to keep other people comfortable. "Maybe," I said honestly, "but not yet." And surprisingly, he accepted that answer without arguing. After we hung up, I sat quietly on my couch for a long time, staring at nothing. Because forgiveness is strange. People think it's a door, open or closed. But sometimes it's just a hallway. Long. Quiet.
Unfinished.
Mom never truly apologized. Not really. A few days later, she sent one short text. "I'm sorry things got so out of hand," which carefully avoided apologizing for anything specific. Tessa sent nothing at all. Last I heard, she was suddenly talking about getting into luxury real estate because, apparently, this country will always create new industries for beautiful, overconfident people with no paperwork. And somehow, that felt exactly right. The strange thing about finally escaping chaos is how quiet healing looks from the outside. No dramatic music, no cinematic breakthrough moment. Just ordinary days slowly becoming lighter. 3 months after everything collapsed, I got promoted to senior analyst. My salary jumped to $96,000 a year. Melissa took me out for coffee after the announcement and joked that removing myself from whatever emotional hostage situation I'd been surviving seemed to improve my performance significantly. Honestly, she wasn't wrong. It turned out peace had professional benefits. Without constant family stress draining me emotionally every evening, I had energy again.
Mental clarity.
Focus. I started sleeping better, cooking more, reading before bed instead of stress scrolling through financial panic disguised as family group chats. I rebuilt my savings faster than expected because nobody was quietly siphoning emotional labor from me every day. And for the first time in years, my future actually felt like mine. Around that same time, I met Ethan Cole. Technically, we met at a mutual friend's game night, though met might be generous, because our first interaction involved arguing over whether people took trivia games too seriously. He was calm in a way that immediately felt unfamiliar to me. Not passive.
Steady.
The kind of man who listened completely before speaking. Our first date was tacos and watching a basketball game in a crowded sports bar where neither of us really cared about the final score. And the weirdest part? Nothing dramatic happened. No emotional landmines. No manipulation. No hidden crisis unfolding underneath conversation. Just two adults talking and laughing and existing peacefully beside each other. I didn't realize how abnormal chaos had become in my life until I experienced someone who didn't create any. By our third date, Ethan asked about my family. Not suspiciously. Not intrusively. Just naturally. So I gave him the shorter version. The van. The cosign pressure. Dad telling me to leave. The financial collapse afterward. He listened quietly the entire time. Then, after a long pause, he said something that stopped me cold. So basically, they confused access with ownership. I stared at him. Because somehow, in one sentence, he summarized what I had spent months emotionally untangling. That was exactly the problem. My family believed my stability belonged to them. My income. My credit. My emotional labor. My reliability. They treated those things like shared household resources instead of parts of me. And because I had spent most of my life being responsible quietly, they stopped seeing responsibility as effort. They started seeing it as obligation. Tessa especially believed wanting something badly enough counted as a business plan. She thought confidence could replace preparation. That charm could replace accountability. And my parents enabled that fantasy for years, because rescuing her made them feel needed. Meanwhile, I became the daughter expected to absorb consequences silently. The stable one. The understanding one. The flexible one. Which sounds flattering until you realize stable people in dysfunctional families are often just the people everyone else leans on hardest without asking permission first. Dad and I eventually met for lunch about a month later. Nothing dramatic. A small diner halfway between our neighborhoods. He looked older. Not physically fragile, exactly. Just worn down in a way pride couldn't fully hide anymore. We talked carefully at first. Work. Weather. Safe topics. Then, eventually, he admitted the van situation nearly destroyed their finances completely. The retirement withdrawal penalties hurt badly. Mom's loan payments were still hanging over them. Tessa barely contributed anything before leaving. I kept thinking one good break would finally straighten her out, he admitted quietly. I stirred my iced tea slowly. You can't protect people from consequences forever, I said. Dad nodded slowly, like someone finally accepting an answer he hated. Then he apologized again. More clearly this time. No excuses hidden inside it. And I realized something sitting across from him that afternoon. Parents are just people eventually. Flawed. Proud.
Scared.
Sometimes weak in ways that damage everyone around them. Understanding that didn't erase what happened, but it changed the shape of the anger. Mom remained different.
Polite occasionally.
Careful. But never truly accountable. Every apology from her sounded strangely passive, like events had simply spiraled accidentally, without anyone actively making harmful choices. I hate that the family drifted apart. I wish things had stayed calmer. I never expected it to become such a mess. Always tragedy without ownership. And honestly, I stopped needing more than that. Not because she deserved forgiveness automatically, because constantly waiting for perfect accountability was keeping part of me emotionally trapped in the same house I already escaped physically. Tessa vanished into another new dream eventually. Luxury real estate. Designer branding. Networking events.
Expensive outfits.
The same cycle wearing different makeup. Sometimes relatives updated me on her life accidentally during holidays or phone calls. I stopped reacting much. Because distance eventually teaches you something important. Not every broken pattern belongs to you to fix. One night, about 6 months after leaving home, I sat alone in my apartment after Ethan had gone home. The dishwasher hummed softly in the kitchen. A basketball game played quietly on television. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Nothing dramatic. Nothing emotionally exhausting. Just peace. And suddenly I remembered the exact moment Dad told me to pack my things. At the time, it felt cruel.
Humiliating.
Like my entire place in the family had become conditional overnight. But sitting there in my quiet apartment, I realized something uncomfortable. That moment didn't destroy my life. It exposed it. It forced me to finally see what had already been true for years. I wasn't living in a supportive family system. I was living inside a leverage system. As long as I remained useful, I belonged. The second I refused access to my stability, my place became negotiable. That realization broke my heart. But it also gave me my freedom. Because once you clearly see the transaction hiding underneath conditional love, it becomes impossible to pretend confusion anymore. That's the lesson I keep returning to. Boundaries always feel cruel to people who benefited from you having none. When I refused to tie my future to debt I didn't create, suddenly I became selfish. Cold.
Disloyal.
But protecting yourself from financial destruction is not cruelty. Refusing manipulation is not betrayal. And saying no does not make you heartless just because somebody else built plans around your silence. Sometimes the moment that hurts you most is also the moment that finally clears your vision. Dad telling me to pack my things was supposed to scare me into obedience. Instead, it forced me to leave a system that only valued me when I was sacrificing something. Best decision I made all year. Maybe my entire adult life. These days, my apartment feels warm instead of tense. My bank account feels safe instead of shared. My future feels earned instead of obligated. And every once in a while, usually late at night when the world gets quiet, I think about how close I came to co-signing that van just to keep everybody comfortable. If I had, I probably would have spent years financially drowning beside them. Instead, I left before dinner. And somehow, that changed everything.